Hello everyone. Tonight, we step into corridors where lamp oil breathes in small halos and silk learns to hush its own footsteps. You and I move through a hush that palaces wear after midnight, where carved doors remember every rumor and incense climbs in thin, patient threads. Screens are half closed, and the air tastes faintly of cedar and warm water. Even the patrol drum keeps its voice under a sleeve. You might not even survive the silence of these halls, because here a pause speaks louder than a confession, and an inhaled breath can mean more than a proclamation. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and your local time in the comments so we can feel how wide this circle is tonight. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for a gentle background noise. And let's begin our journey together tonight. You enter by a side gate, where lanterns are trimmed low, and we follow a narrow path stitched with moonlight. The walls keep yesterday's warmth. Somewhere a basin cools by an open lattice. Hands stay folded because movement is a language, and every language has rules. In this place, desire is not a blaze, but a protocol, measured, scheduled, covered with silk, set down in ledgers that pretend to be indifferent. When tallies and seals pass from palm to palm, you feel how a night can be counted like grain, how closeness can become an entry line. It is not romance the way ballads tell it. It is choreography baths drawn at precise hours, hair loosened to the measured length of a song, to a cup of tea warmed exactly twice and then poured away. Not for taste, but for timing. We walk farther in, where the air thins to whispers and water. Attendants practice the art of not disturbing a curtain. Copper kettles exhale a breath of cloves and angelica. A bell answers itself in a room you cannot see. Body and clock learn to meet halfway. Pulse is asked to slow. Warmth is coaxed to soften. A window is left barely open, so the night air can do a little thinking for you. Physicians exist here like threads through fabric, present by instruction if not by face, teaching how rest becomes a kind of medicine, how a bath begins cool and turns warm, how a draft steadies blood without giving it a name. You hear words that sound like poetry, breathing counted on the knuckles, a posture that turns attention into a doorway, a melody that knows how to carry heat to the far end of a corridor and leave it there. Not every answer speaks aloud. Some answers are written in the way a candle is trimmed, in the slow travel of a comb, in a sleeve that lingers over a rail, a heartbeat longer than custom. Ritual becomes a bridge over waters the rules do not mention. When a visit is granted, the world narrows to measured steps and verified seals. When a visit is not granted, the world widens to substitutions that have learned to be gentle. Tea, fragrance, a conversation allowed to last, the steady company of voices until the night forgets its urgency. Longing is folded into craft embroidery that makes time drowsy. Stories told, like soft weather, music that keeps the body from burning too bright. Even the garden learns to help. Leaves rub together like advice, and a small run of water remembers cloud and mountain and brings that memory indoors. There is discipline in this kindness. Doors that open must also close. Names written must also vanish without injury. At first light, mats are rolled, registers checked, and the palace restores a cool, exact face. Yet the night keeps its own minute scents that linger. A teacup warm to the touch, a page marked by an absent hand. You begin to understand that the secret behind the curtain is not merely what is permitted, but how feeling is given shape until it can pass inspection. And a softer twist arrives as your eyes adjust to the dim. The safest method here is neither indulgence nor denial, but transformation, turning heat into rhythm, urgency into breath, so that desire may live safely inside the very rules that pretend to master it. You and I step farther into the weave of empire, where order itself feels like fragrance that clings to the night. The palace is not only a building but a living map of discipline. Every beam of carved wood, every tile glazed against rain, Every screen painted with clouds and cranes is more than decoration. It is instruction. You notice how the walls are tall enough to keep out not just intruders but chance itself. How each courtyard seems designed to remind its inhabitants that they belong to a rhythm older and greater than their own hearts. Beyond the gates, the capital murmurs. We hear markets closing at dusk, their calls softening into memory. We smell roasted chestnuts cooling on wooden trays, ink drying on scholars' brushes, smoke rising from hearths where families count the hours until dawn. The city is vast, but every pulse within it leans toward the palace. For behind those walls lies the authority that shapes harvests, taxes, marriages, even the hush of prayers. To live in this world is to live under the weight of unseen eyes. Inside, hierarchy glitters as surely as gold. Eunuchs glide through corridors with measured steps, bearing messages sealed in vermilion. Attendants move silently, their faces trained into serenity, their gestures precise as brushstrokes. Concubines wait in chambers that breathe fragrance, each room arranged to suggest peace while hiding storms of ambition. You feel how the very air is choreographed. Bells mark hours, drums announce patrols, incense signals transitions. Nothing is unmarked, nothing without ritual. And yet, in the stillness between ceremonies, human needs persist. Desire, though never named aloud, flows beneath the surface like an underground river. Officials record tallies, allocate visits, prepare baths, light lamps, fold bedding, all as if affection were another item in the imperial ledger. To the world outside, this seems like order. To those within, it is a structure that cages as much as it preserves. You and I linger by a courtyard pond, lanterns shimmering against the dark water. A carp surfaces, disturbing the reflection, and for a moment you sense how fragile even the strictest order can be. For behind the quiet discipline of the palace lies an unspoken truth. Rules may direct bodies, but they cannot extinguish longing. It hides in gestures too small for the ledgers to capture, in glances exchanged behind sleeves, in the way footsteps pause by a curtain before moving on. And yet, behind the stillness, something gentle begins to shift. The palace prides itself on controlling every hour, every gesture, every need. But the more carefully desire is measured, the more inventively it finds ways to slip through. What is hidden becomes the very force that shapes what is seen. You and I follow the path of a girl whose youth is pressed into silk long before she understands its weight. Outside the palace, she once knew simpler scent smoke rising from kitchen fires, soil damp after summer rain, the laughter of neighbors spilling over walls. That life fades the moment she steps through gates high enough to touch the clouds. Here, childhood ends not with age but with arrival. We walk beside her as attendants guide her into initiation. Every movement becomes a lesson. How to lower her gaze without seeming timid. How to walk at a pace that is neither hurried nor slow. How to fold her hands in a gesture that suggests obedience but not weakness. These lessons are not spoken. They are pressed upon her with adjustments, corrections, glances sharp as needles. In the silence, she learns that the palace does not need words to teach. It molds by watching. At night, she lies beneath embroidered silk, listening to the unfamiliar quiet. Instead of crickets and village dogs, she hears the distant echo of patrol drums, the murmur of courtiers rehearsing arguments, the whisper of women practicing songs they may never sing. Sleep does not come easily. Her thoughts turn like lanterns in the breeze, casting patterns of both fear and wonder. Days stretch into rituals. The young entrant is taught to move through gardens without disturbing gravel, to pour tea so that steam rises evenly, to embroider symbols whose meanings she only half understands. It seems endless, yet she absorbs each detail because she knows mistakes here do not fade. they linger like stains on silk. And yet, there is something else beneath her obedience. You sense it in the way she notices more than she should, the minister who bows too quickly, the concubine who hides a smile behind her sleeve, the eunuch whose footsteps falter when certain names are spoken. She does not repeat what she sees, but she remembers. That memory, invisible for now, is the seed of survival. The palace tests her constantly. One day she is praised for her grace. The next she is ignored, her presence erased by silence. Another girl stumbles and is dismissed. Another dares to speak too freely and is forgotten as quickly as she arrived. Our young figure learns that the true lesson is not beauty or talent, but endurance. To bend without breaking, to listen without betraying, to remain unseen until the moment arrives when being seen will matter. One evening, she passes through a hall where screens glow with painted cranes. A single glance from the emperor falls upon her, neither long nor short, but enough to change her fate. It is not affection yet, nor power, only possibility. But possibility in the palace is as sharp as a blade hidden in silk. You feel how her youth, once a burden, now becomes an opening. And yet, behind this fragile beginning, something gentle begins to shift. The palace that seemed a cage is also a stage, and even the quietest presence can alter its story. She does not yet know it, but the curtain she walks behind will one day carry secrets that reach beyond her own life. You and I enter now the chambers where night lingers longer than dawn, where the air is heavy with perfumes meant not only to please but to compete. The harem is a world within a world, a garden of silk where blossoms are admired, yet every blossom longs for the same light. You notice how the floors shine as though polished to erase all footsteps, but echoes remain soft laughter carrying envy, sighs stitched with calculation, whispers folded neatly into shadows. Here, companionship and rivalry are inseparable. A smile might conceal a barb. A gift might carry the weight of insult. You watch as women gather around embroidery frames, their needles moving steadily, their words flowing more carefully than silk thread. Each phrase is chosen, each glance deliberate. Beneath the quiet industry lies a contest sharper than steel. Nights are marked not by stars but by tallies and tokens. Wooden slips pass from hand to hand. Jade pieces decide where favor will rest. A single visit transforms a chamber into triumph, while neglect feels like exile, even within the same walls. You and I sense the ache of waiting, the sound of footsteps that do not stop, the disappointment carried in silence when the lantern is not lit. Desire is accounted for, rationed like tribute, and yet never fully satisfied. Still, behind this system, secret languages form. A candle allowed to burn too low, a sleeve brushed lightly against another, a teacup set down with unusual care, each becomes a sentence in a code written for those who know how to read it. She learns quickly, our figure moving with the grace of someone who has understood that survival here depends not on beauty alone, but on the ability to listen to what is not said. Intrigues bloom like night flowers. Alliances are forged over shared verses. Betrayals, prepared under the pretext of kindness. You see how one rival hides her ambition in laughter, while another cloaks hers in humility. Neither mask is complete. She studies both, storing the knowledge in silence. Slowly, she becomes less a participant than an observer, and from observation comes advantage. Yet, fate is not always kind. There comes a time when her favor wanes, when rivals move more boldly, and the emperor's gaze shifts elsewhere. Whispers suggest removal. Orders are drawn. She is sent away, perhaps to a convent cloaked in piety, perhaps to quarters meant for those who no longer matter. For most, this would mean the end. For her, it is a pause. Exile teaches her patience more than luxury ever could. And yet, behind this forced retreat, something gentle begins to shift. Distance refines her will. Absence sharpens her presence. What was meant as dismissal becomes preparation, and what seemed like silence becomes the ground where a new voice waits to rise. You and I walk beside her once more as the gates reopen, not with the eagerness of welcome, but with the inevitability of fate. The convent's silence had pressed her into stillness, but stillness can become strength, and now she returns carrying a knowledge shaped in absence. The palace seems unchanged, its corridors still glowing with lacquer, its gardens still whispering with water, but she is no longer the same. The emperor, older and warier, finds in her not only memory but reassurance. Where others offer flattery, she offers calm. Where others scheme with hurried words, she speaks softly, letting silence do half the work. You can almost feel the air bending toward her, conversations tilting so that her presence becomes the pivot. A glance, a phrase, a suggestion wrapped in gentleness. Each is a stone placed carefully into the river of politics, guiding its current without ever breaking its surface. The court, however, is restless. Ministers argue in chambers heavy with scrolls, their voices low but their intentions sharp. Some resent her return, seeing in it the shadow of influence, too great for comfort. Others hope to align with her, sensing that her patience carries a hidden authority. Whispers spread like smoke, of factions forming, of alliances shifting, of strategies woven in the folds of robes. You and I walk through this atmosphere, feeling how fragile trust has become, how each word risks becoming a weapon. She learns quickly that politics is not unlike the harem. Both demand vigilance, both thrive on perception. The difference is scale. Here, the stakes are provinces, armies, the pulse of an empire. She applies what she has learned, watching gestures, reading pauses, storing details others overlook. Ministers who think themselves clever find their maneuvers anticipated, their plots unraveling before they take shape. And through it all, she maintains the mask of gentleness, never revealing the calculations beneath. There are nights when she sits with the emperor in quiet chambers, the lantern light soft on scrolls and inkstones. Their conversations drift from poetry to policy, from memory to strategy. To others, it seems intimacy. In truth, it is governance disguised as affection. The empire is being shaped in these rooms, decision by decision, word by word. You sense how power, once withheld, now begins to gather around her like a cloak. But the higher her influence grows, the sharper the shadows lengthen. Rivals whisper of danger. Courtiers rehearse accusations that may one day surface. Even her allies know that trust is fragile in a place where survival demands constant negotiation. She is aware of this, perhaps more than anyone. Her silence at times feels heavy, but it is the silence of calculation, not fear. And yet, behind this careful return, something gentle begins to shift. The palace that once dismissed her now leans upon her. The exile that once marked her as forgotten now shapes her as indispensable. What was meant to end her presence becomes the very ground on which her authority will grow. You and I step now into corridors where every lantern burns longer, where each gesture feels weighted with consequence. The path she follows is no longer the quiet survival of youth or the wary maneuvering of return, it is ascent, deliberate and unrelenting. You sense it first in subtle ways, a recommendation accepted more quickly than others, a dismissal that follows her quiet disapproval, a policy whispered in her chamber before it appears as an edict. Power is no longer beside her. It has begun to flow through her. The emperor, aging and often weary, leans upon her presence more each day. Ministers who once dismissed her now bow a little deeper, testing whether their loyalty might earn them favor. The harem, once a battlefield of rivals, grows quieter in her shadow, as if even intrigue understands that its currents must now flow around her rather than against her. We walk with her through this transformation, watching how influence becomes authority, how suggestion becomes command. She does not seize openly. Instead, she rearranges quietly. A rival is moved to a distant province under the pretext of honor. Another finds her petitions unanswered until her voice fades into silence. An ally is raised, not ostentatiously, but in ways that ripple outward, one appointment leading to another, one loyal official placed beside another, until the court itself begins to echo her will. What appears effortless is in truth deliberate, crafted with the patience of someone who has lived through exile and learned the cost of misstep. And yet, she is not untouched by the solitude of such ascent. At night, you and I see her in the glow of a single lamp, scrolls spread before her, the quiet of the garden pressing against the lattice. The path to power is paved not only with triumph but with sacrifice. Each decision that strengthens her position also tightens the circle around her. Allies are fewer than they seem, trust more fragile than she wishes. Still, she continues, because to stop would be to fall. And falling here means erasure. The empire itself begins to shift in her image. Temples favored, taxes adjusted, appointments chosen with care all reflect her unseen hand. Scholars debate reforms without realizing whose thought first guided them. Farmers in distant provinces feel the reach of her influence in the weight of their levies. Soldiers in border garrisons march under orders written by officials she has quietly shaped. The palace whispers her presence, even when her name is not spoken. But influence invites resistance. Ministers who feel displaced gather in corners. Their voice is low, but urgent. They speak of tradition, of balance, of dangers to the order of heaven. Their words carry threat, yet they hesitate, for they know the emperor's trust in her is unshaken. She, too, knows their danger, and she prepares not with open confrontation, but with foresight, arranging the board so that when the moment comes, every piece will already belong to her. And one day, that moment arrives. The emperor falters, the court trembles, and decisions must be made. She steps forward, not as a shadow, not as a whisper, but as the figure who has long been preparing. In the hush that follows, her authority crystallizes. The path she has walked, fragile youth, dangerous intrigues, reluctant return culminates here, where she stands as the axis of power. And yet, behind the triumph, something gentle begins to shift. What once was ambition fulfilled now becomes burden carried. What once felt like victory now begins to feel like inevitability. Power, once pursued, is now hers, but with it comes the solitude of those who can no longer step aside. You and I walk into halls where the air itself seems gilded, where ceremony stretches like an unbroken thread and authority settles as heavily as brocade. This is the height of her power, when the empire turns at her will, when her presence is not merely influence but command. You notice how ministers bow more deeply, their words bending to fit her rhythm. The emperor, though still seated on the throne, leans more and more upon her voice. What began as counsel whispered in quiet chambers now resounds as decree. The palace glitters with affirmation. Lanterns blaze during festivals, until the avenues seem like rivers of fire. Musicians play through nights so long that strings fray, their melodies rising in honor of her reign. Monks chant blessings that echo against temple walls, their voices trembling with both reverence and caution. She is no longer only a figure behind the curtain. She is the hand that adjusts the balance of the realm. Reforms ripple outward. Taxes are gathered with greater precision. New offices rise while others vanish. Monasteries find favor or restriction, according to her unseen design. Scholars sense her presence in every edict, though they dare not speak her name too loudly. Farmers and merchants feel her reign in the rhythm of their days, sometimes as relief, sometimes as weight. The empire has become a mirror of her choices. And yet, Standing at this height, she also feels the chill that comes with altitude. Reverence is constant, but it is not warmth. Every bow that greets her carries a trace of calculation. Every praise hides a tremor of unease. You and I see it in the way her eyes search faces for sincerity, finding only masks polished by necessity. Power grants obedience, but it cannot command affection. The harem, once noisy with rivalries, is hushed now, subdued under her shadow. But the court outside seethes quietly. Some ministers harbour resentment, whispering of tradition overturned, of balances unsettled. They speak carefully, disguising defiance as loyalty, yet the tension coils tighter with each passing season. She knows this, perhaps more than they realize. She listens for tremors beneath the surface, sensing how quickly reverence can turn into resistance. Even in private, solitude deepens. She walks through gardens heavy with blossoms, their fragrance overwhelming, their beauty excessive. By the pond, she watches the moon's reflection fracture with each ripple of water, and you sense her thoughts drifting to the fragility hidden within grandeur. At times, she sits beneath lantern light, with scrolls spread before her, her brush steady, her expression unreadable. The empire obeys her hand, yet her heart carries the knowledge that shadows lengthen even beneath the brightest glow. Festivals continue. Drums resound. Incense climbs in endless spirals. But behind the magnificence, you and I feel another current moving. Resistance gathers in whispers. Plots take root in silence. And the empire begins to ask questions it cannot yet voice aloud. The height of power is radiant, but its brilliance already conceals the seeds of its decline. You and I step now into chambers where the air feels heavier, where the glow of triumph has begun to dim at the edges. Decline in the palace does not fall like a sudden storm. It seeps inward slowly, like damp creeping through stone. The ceremonies remain. The ministers still bow. The incense still spirals upward. But beneath the surface, you can feel the tremor of change. Illness begins to write itself into her days. The brush she once held with ease now trembles slightly. The pauses in her speech grow longer. The weight of silence fills spaces where command once rang clear. Physicians arrive with bowls of herbal remedies, powders folded into honey, baths prescribed to soothe the blood. Their rituals feel more like ceremony than cure, gestures meant to preserve dignity rather than deliver healing. You and I hear their voices softening into resignation, even as they bow and declare their loyalty. The court feels this fragility and adjusts itself like a flock sensing a shift in the wind. Rivals begin to stir, their whispers hidden in corners of shadowed halls. Allies, too, grow cautious, their loyalty tinged with self-preservation. The same officials who once bent willingly now hedge their words, testing where the future may lead. Each petition, each silence, becomes a measure of shifting loyalties. Beyond the palace walls, society mirrors this restlessness. Farmers complain of levies that press too heavily. Merchants murmur of unrest. Border garrisons speak of discontent, carried in the dust of long marches. Reports of uprisings arrive folded neatly on bamboo slips, but their urgency cannot be disguised by the neat handwriting. Every rebellion, no matter how small, feels larger in the atmosphere of uncertainty. Still, when she appears, the court bows, and the weight of habit momentarily restores the illusion of unbroken authority. Her words, fewer now, carry echoes strong enough to remind everyone of the power she once wielded. Authority in decline still lingers, like fragrance on a robe that has been folded away. Yet the scent is fading, and everyone can sense it. The palace itself reflects the change. Doors open more hesitantly. Attendants move more cautiously. Laughter thins like smoke. Where once every gesture radiated control, now hesitation leaves faint cracks. And through those cracks, suspicion grows. Ministers confer in secret, wondering aloud if the empire is ready for transition, if tradition will demand her removal, if silence itself will soon speak louder than her voice. And yet, behind the quiet erosion, something gentle continues to shift. She is not blind to what unfolds. She knows power has begun to slip from her hand, yet she holds her posture with dignity. In the dim light of her private chamber, she sits among scrolls she no longer has the strength to read, gazing instead at the lantern's flame. You and I feel the weight of her solitude, victory remembered, authority slipping, legacy waiting to be written. The empire watches her fade, but it does so with unease, knowing that what follows will not erase her shadow. You and I walk together now through the final corridors of her story, where footsteps fade into memory and presence begins to dissolve into echo. The palace is quieter, its rituals more fragile, as if every bow and every whisper already belongs to history rather than to rule. She no longer commands with the strength of her hand, but with the shadow of what she once was. And yet, even in fading, her influence lingers like incense that clings long after the flame is gone. When her seal is finally set aside, the court breathes with both relief and unease. Some ministers call her reign extraordinary, a rare testament to possibility. Others mutter of disruption, of balances overturned, of traditions bent until they broke. Their words are careful, but their tones betray anxiety. How will history remember her? And how will remembering her shape them in turn? You feel how each judgment says as much about the speaker as about the woman they describe. Beyond the palace walls, the people carry their own memories. Farmers recall seasons when taxes eased and others when they grew heavy. Merchants speak of order in trade, but also of restrictions that stifled. Monks whisper of temples favored and temples neglected. To the common voice, her reign is not a single truth, but a mosaic of contradictions, both generous and exacting, both luminous and unsettling. And, still, legends form. In marketplaces, stories spread of her sharp gaze, of her quiet patience, of the way she turned silence into strength. Some speak with admiration, painting her as proof that determination could bend even the sternest order. Others speak with caution, warning of the dangers when ambition wears the mask of gentleness. Each tale, embroidered and reshaped, becomes part of the fabric of her memory. The empire, too, is altered. Successors step carefully in the space she leaves behind, their choices shadowed by comparison. Policies are tested against her example, some repeated, some deliberately reversed. Even centuries later, scholars will debate her meaning. Was she an aberration or a revelation? Did she weaken tradition or prove its flexibility? Each argument circles back to the same truth. Once such power was taken, it could never be forgotten. You and I return to the garden where moonlight rests on the pond. The ripples blur the reflection of the palace roof, just as memory blurs the details of her reign. And yet the shape remains unmistakable. Her story is more than what she did. It is the possibility she revealed, that even within rules meant to confine, a voice could rise and reshape the order of things. And here lies the final quiet twist. Her legacy is not only in edicts or reforms, nor even in whispers of scandal or reverence. It is in the way future generations dream differently because she once lived. What was unthinkable became thinkable, and that, more than decree or ceremony, is the echo that endures. You and I return once more to the avenues where lanterns bloom against the night, their light swaying gently as if to honor what has passed. The patrol drum sounds low and steady, no longer a call to order, but a rhythm that guides us back to reflection. Incense drifts upward in pale spirals, carrying memory rather than command, its fragrance soft as the hush that follows a long story told in confidence. The palace behind us is quieter now. Its lacquered doors are closed, its painted screens folded, its gardens resting under dew. Yet within its silence, her presence lingers. You can almost feel it in the still air, in the weight of the rituals that continue even after she is gone. The empire moves forward, but it does so in the shape she left behind, whether in loyalty, suspicion, or awe. As we walk together beneath the lantern halos, you realize that her story is not one of endings but of questions. When you think of power, do you imagine fear commands sharp as steel, silences heavy with threat, or do you imagine something quieter, like the discipline of patience, the resilience of will, the ability to transform even longing into a form that can endure? The answer drifts between both, unresolved. Because history is never one truth alone. Her legacy is carried not only in edicts and chronicles, but in the way her existence widened the imagination of what was possible. Behind the curtain meant to restrict, she revealed that will could move like water, shaping stone without breaking it. That echo cannot be erased. For once the world has seen such a presence, it cannot pretend it never happened. You and I pause here, at the threshold where story meets sleep. The lanterns dim, the drums fall silent, the incense fades to a whisper. What remains is reflection, waiting to travel with you into dreams. If you'd like to continue these journeys together, you know what to do. But for now, may sleep carry you gently through the night. May the quiet of history soften your thoughts, and may the whispers of the past fold into the silence that guides you into rest.